I don't talk much, not because I have nothing to say, but because what I feel usually has weight, and weight needs silence. There are thoughts that cannot survive noise. They need space. They need slowness. They need time. I learned that early. While others spoke quickly, filling every gap, I listened. I watched expressions. I noticed tone. I felt shifts in the room before words changed. And often, by the time I was ready to speak, the moment had already passed. So I stayed quiet. For a long time, I thought that was a problem. People asked, "Why are you so quiet? Why don't you share more? Why don't you speak up?" They said it kindly, sometimes jokingly, but inside, those questions landed heavily. Because I wanted to speak. I just didn't know how to translate depth into quick sentences. Have you ever felt that? That what you feel is too complex for casual conversation? That small talk scratches the surface while you are living several layers below? Being quiet in a loud world can make you feel invisible, as if your presence only counts when it's heard. So I tried. I forced myself to speak more, to react faster, to sound confident. And on the outside, it worked. People noticed me. Conversations moved. Silence disappeared. But something else disappeared too. Me? I felt drained after every interaction. Not tired, drained. Like I had given away something essential just to fit in. That's when I realized something important. Silence is not emptiness. It is protection. For people who feel deeply, silence is how we survive. Because everything enters us fully: words, tones, emotions, unspoken tensions. We don't just hear them, we absorb them. And when you absorb the world without pause, you eventually overflow. I didn't understand this until I burned out quietly. No dramatic collapse, no loud breakdown, just a slow dullness. I stopped feeling inspired, stopped enjoying conversations, stopped trusting my own instincts. That scared me. So I began to pull back. Less talking, more listening, less explaining, more observing. And in that quiet, I found myself again. I realized that my depth was never a weakness. It was simply unsupported. The world is designed for fast thinkers, quick responders, strong voices. But there is another kind of power, quiet power, the kind that doesn't dominate a room, but stabilizes it, the kind that doesn't interrupt, but understands, the kind that speaks rarely, but meaningfully. When someone like that talks, how people listen, not because they are loud, but because they are precise. I started to accept my rhythm. I don't jump into conversations. I enter them slowly. I don't speak to be seen. I speak when something matters. And that changed how people responded. They leaned in. They paused. They waited. Silence became part of my presence, not an absence of it. Have you noticed how some people make you feel calm without saying much? That is quiet power. It comes from depth, from reflection, from emotional awareness, from choosing words carefully, and it often belongs to those who feel deeply. Feeling deeply is not about being emotional all the time. It's about intensity. You feel joy intensely, sadness intensely, connection intensely, which is why you need more space, more recovery, more silence. Without it, you become overwhelmed. Not because you are weak, but because you are open. For a long time, I wished I was different, more expressive, more talkative, more effortless. But now, I see something else. My quiet nature allows me to notice details others miss. A pause in someone's voice, a shift in mood, a sentence that hides pain. And when I do speak, it comes from that noticing. It comes from depth, not impulse. This is not something you need to fix. It is something you need to honor. If you are listening and you recognize yourself here, if you've ever felt too quiet, too sensitive, too deep, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are tuned differently. And that tuning is rare. The world doesn't need everyone to be louder. It needs some people to listen, to feel, to hold space, to understand what cannot be said easily. Quiet people carry emotional intelligence like a second language. We read the room before speaking. We process before reacting. We feel first. And yes, it can be heavy, but it can also be powerful. When you stop fighting your quiet nature, it stops draining you. It starts supporting you. You don't need to become louder to matter. You need to become grounded in who you already are. Silence is not your enemy. It is your home. And when you learn to stand firmly inside it, your presence will speak for you. For a long time, I thought silence meant distance, that if I didn't speak, people would feel unloved, that if I didn't explain, they would misunderstand me. So in relationships, I tried to be more expressive. I forced words out even when they didn't feel ready. I explained my feelings before I fully understood them myself. And somehow, that only made things messier. Because quiet people don't process emotions out loud. We process inward. We need time to feel something completely before we name it. When we rush that process, our words become inaccurate, incomplete, and that can confuse others even more than silence. I learned this the hard way. There were moments when someone I cared about asked, "What are you thinking?" And I answered quickly, just to fill the gap. But the truth was, I didn't know yet. I was still feeling. And later, when clarity arrived, my earlier words no longer matched my truth. That's when I realized something important. Quiet depth requires trust. Trust in your own timing. Trust that silence is not absence of care. In fact, for people who feel deeply, silence often means the opposite. It means we care enough to think carefully, to feel fully, to choose honesty over speed. But the world often mistakes quietness for indifference. So we start apologizing for our nature. I'm just bad at expressing myself. I'm not good with words. I'm too quiet. But what if you're not bad at expressing? What if you express differently? Through presence, through consistency, through listening. Quiet people show love in subtle ways. They remember small details. They notice changes in mood. They stay when things get uncomfortable. They don't always say, "I'm here." They just are. In work environments, this quiet power is often underestimated. Meetings reward quick answers, fast thinkers, confident voices, and if you don't jump in, your ideas can disappear. I used to watch discussions unfold, already knowing the solution, but waiting to see the whole picture, waiting to understand all sides. And by the time I spoke, the conversation had moved on. At first, that made me doubt myself. Was I too slow? Too cautious? Too passive? But over time, I noticed something else. When I finally spoke, my words landed. They weren't many, but they were clear. They didn't interrupt. They reframed. And slowly, people began to wait. They learned that when I spoke, it meant something. Quiet power doesn't compete. It calibrates. It doesn't dominate attention. It steadies it. And that steadiness is rare. In leadership, quiet power looks different. It's not about commanding the room. It's about creating safety. When a quiet leader listens, people feel heard. When they speak, They don't waste words. They ask questions that go deeper than surface problems. They notice tension before it explodes, and they address it without drama. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. Being quiet also makes you vulnerable, because when you feel deeply, criticism cuts deeper too. A careless comment, a dismissive tone, an overlooked effort. You don't brush it off easily. You carry it. And if you don't protect your inner world, it can overwhelm you. That's why boundaries are essential for quiet people. Not loud boundaries, not dramatic ones. Quiet boundaries. Choosing who gets access to your depth. Choosing when to engage and when to step back. Choosing environments that respect slowness, reflection, and emotional nuance. I didn't learn this early. I gave my energy away too easily, listened too much, absorbed too much, until I felt empty. Now I'm more selective, not closed, just intentional. I still listen deeply, I still care deeply, but I don't pour myself into places that cannot hold depth, and that has changed everything. I no longer feel guilty for needing silence after social moments. I no longer explain why I need time alone. I understand that quiet recovery is not a luxury for me. It is maintenance. If you are someone who feels everything deeply, your nervous system works harder. You process more information, more emotion, more nuance. So you need more rest, more space, more stillness. This is not weakness. It is biology. It is sensitivity. It is depth. Quiet power grows when you stop comparing your inner life to other people's outer expressions. When you stop measuring value by volume. When you let yourself be exactly as you are, soft-spoken, thoughtful, deep-feeling. The world needs that, especially now. And the more you accept it, the less you feel the need to defend it. Silence becomes natural again. Not something you hide behind, but something you stand within. And from that place, your presence speaks louder than words ever could. From that place, relationships began to feel different, not louder, not easier, but clearer. I stopped trying to explain myself before I understood myself. I stopped filling silence just to make others comfortable. And something interesting happened. The people who mattered stayed. They didn't rush me. They didn't demand constant reassurance. They didn't panic in quiet moments. They learned my rhythm, and I learned something important about connection. Not everyone can sit with depth. Not everyone is comfortable with silence. And that's not a failure, it's a difference. For a long time, I thought being misunderstood meant I was doing something wrong, that I needed to communicate better, be more expressive, be clearer. But sometimes, being misunderstood is simply a sign of mismatch. Quiet people often get labeled cold, distant, hard to read. But the truth is, we are often feeling too much, not too little. We just don't broadcast it. In friendships, this can create quiet pain. You show up, you listen, you remember, you care deeply. But because you don't say it often, people assume it's not there. And when that happens, it hurts in a very silent way. You don't argue, you don't defend yourself. You just withdraw a little more. I used to do that. Disappear emotionally before I disappeared physically. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to protect. Because when you feel deeply, misunderstanding feels personal. It feels like being unseen. Over time, I learned something gentler. The right people don't need constant proof. They feel your presence. They notice your consistency, your listening, your subtle support. They don't measure care by volume. They measure it by sincerity. And in love, quiet depth becomes even more delicate. Love asks for vulnerability. And for quiet people, vulnerability doesn't come in dramatic declarations. It comes in trust, in letting someone see your inner world slowly, layer by layer. That takes time, and if rushed, it can feel unsafe. I've been in situations where I was asked to open up faster than I was ready, I to explain feelings that were still forming, and instead of creating closeness, it created pressure. Quiet love needs patience. It grows in shared silence, in parallel presence, in moments where nothing is said, but everything is felt. When someone can sit beside you without needing entertainment, that's intimacy. When someone respects your quiet, that's love. But not everyone understands this. Some people need constant expression to feel secure, and that doesn't make them wrong. It just means they may not be compatible with quiet depth. Learning this saved me from blaming myself, from shrinking, from performing. I stopped trying to be louder to be loved and started choosing connections that felt natural, where silence wasn't awkward, where depth wasn't rushed, where emotions could breathe. This also changed how I handle conflict. Quiet people don't like conflict, not because we avoid truth, but because we feel the emotional weight of confrontation intensely. Raised voices, sharp words, uncontrolled emotion. It all hits hard, so we often retreat to process first. But retreat is often misread as avoidance. In reality, it's reflection. We need time to understand what we feel before responding honestly. When given that time, our responses are thoughtful, measured, accurate. Without it, we shut down. Learning to communicate this was a turning point. I began saying things like, I need some time to think. I'll come back to this. I'm not ready to talk yet. Not as an excuse, but as a boundary. And the people who respected that earned deeper access to me. Those who didn't slowly drifted away. And that was okay. Quiet power is not about pleasing everyone. It's about being aligned. Aligned with your nervous system, your emotional depth, your natural pace. When you honor that, relationships become clearer, not perfect, but honest. You stop forcing chemistry. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for who you are. And slowly, you feel safer being seen. Not all at once, but enough. If you're listening and you've ever felt misunderstood because you're quiet, because you need time, because you feel deeply, I want you to know this. You don't need to become louder to deserve connection. You need environments that can hold silence, people who don't rush depth, relationships that don't demand performance. Quiet power thrives there. And when it does, you don't disappear. You finally arrive. Arriving quietly often means walking alone for a while. Not because you are unwanted, not because you failed to connect, but because depth requires space, and space often looks like solitude. For a long time, I was afraid of being alone. Not physically alone, but emotionally unaccompanied. I worried that if I stopped trying, stopped explaining, stopped reaching out, I would disappear completely. So I stayed in places that felt too loud, in conversations that moved too fast, in relationships that didn't leave room for silence. And every time, I left feeling smaller, more tired, more confused. It took me years to understand this simple truth. Loneliness is not the same as solitude. Loneliness is feeling unseen while surrounded by people. Solitude is choosing to be with yourself without running away. Quiet people often mistake solitude for failure. Because we already feel different, already a step out of rhythm. So when we find ourselves alone, we assume something is wrong. But often, solitude is where quiet power grows. When no one is watching, when no one is demanding, when no one is rushing you, that's when your inner voice finally becomes audible. At first, that voice can feel uncomfortable. It brings questions, unanswered ones, uncomfortable ones. Who am I when I'm not responding to others? What do I actually want when no one expects anything? What feelings have I been carrying without naming? In silence, these questions don't disappear. They sit with you, and sitting with them takes courage. There were evenings when I sat alone and felt a quiet sadness I couldn't explain. No clear reason, no obvious cause, just a soft heaviness. Before, I would distract myself, noise, screens, people, anything to avoid that feeling. But when I allowed myself to stay with it, something changed. The sadness didn't grow. It softened. It felt less like a threat and more like a message. Quiet emotions don't demand attention. They ask for listening. And when you listen, they often tell you what you need. Rest, distance, honesty, change. Solitude gave me the language to understand myself, not in words, but in sensations. Tension, relief, resonance, resistance. I learned to notice which environments drained me, which conversations felt heavy, which people allowed me to breathe. This awareness became my compass. Quiet power is not just about how you show up, it's about where you choose to stand. Not every room deserves your depth. Not every person earns your energy. And solitude teaches you that it's okay to choose. I stopped forcing myself into spaces that didn't respect silence. I stopped apologizing for needing time alone. I stopped equating presence with availability. That shift felt uncomfortable at first. Because when you step back, you see clearly who reaches out and who doesn't, who respects your boundaries, who only values you when you perform. That clarity can hurt, but it also liberates. You stop chasing connection. You allow alignment, and alignment feels calm. In solitude, I also learned something else. Quiet people are often afraid of being too much, too sensitive, too intense, too deep. So we hide parts of ourselves. We soften opinions. We dilute emotions. We shrink reactions. But when you're alone, there is no need to shrink. You can feel fully, think deeply, react honestly, and in that honesty, you reclaim parts of yourself you gave away. I remember realizing that my depth wasn't a burden. It was a capacity to reflect, to empathize, to understand complexity. These things don't flourish in constant interaction. They need stillness. They need time. Solitude became a place of recalibration, a way to return to center, not isolation, but intentional withdrawal, like closing your eyes to listen better. Quiet power grows when you stop fearing emptiness, when you realize that silence is not absence, it is presence without noise. Many people avoid solitude because they fear what they might feel. But for deep feelers, avoiding solitude means avoiding truth. And truth has a cost, but it also has a reward: clarity. When you sit with yourself long enough, you begin to trust your inner signals. You stop outsourcing validation. You stop needing constant reassurance. You become less reactive, more grounded, not detached, not cold, centered. This is where quiet confidence forms. Not the loud kind, not the performative kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that doesn't seek approval, the kind that says, I know who I am, even if no one else does right now. That confidence changes how you move in the world. You speak when it matters. You stay silent when it doesn't. You choose presence over noise. And people feel that. They may not understand it, but they respect it. Some may drift away, others may draw closer. And that's okay. Quiet power is selective by nature. It doesn't spread thin, it concentrates. If you are listening and you feel drawn to solitude, don't label it as failure. Ask what it's offering you: space, healing, perspective, rest. Solitude is not a void, it is a workshop, a place where your inner world reorganizes itself. And when you step back out, you do so more whole, more aligned, more quietly powerful. Not because you learned how to speak louder, but because you learned how to listen deeper to yourself. And that, more than anything, changes everything. Listening deeper changes how you walk back into the world. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but quietly. You start to notice that you no longer rush to respond. You pause, and that pause is no longer empty. It's full of awareness. You feel the space between stimulus and reaction, and in that space, you finally have a choice. Before, the world pulled reactions out of you: a tone, a look, a comment, and your nervous system reacted before your mind caught up. Now you breathe first, you feel first, you let the moment pass through you instead of sticking inside. This is quiet strength, not control, not suppression, but regulation. When you feel deeply, regulation becomes essential. Without it, everything feels like too much. With it, depth becomes stable. I used to think that being sensitive meant being fragile. That feeling deeply meant being easily hurt. But I see it differently now. Sensitivity is not fragility. It is responsiveness. It means your system registers subtle information, emotional shifts, unspoken tension, hidden meaning. And when you learn how to hold that information without collapsing under it, you become resilient. Not hardened. Resilient. Resilience doesn't mean nothing affects you. It means you recover without losing yourself. Quiet power grows from this kind of resilience. You don't numb yourself to survive. You learn how to process. You give feelings space, then let them move. This is why quiet people often become wise with age, not because life was easier, but because they spent time digesting it, thinking about experiences, replaying conversations, understanding patterns. What once felt like overthinking becomes integration. I began to trust my inner timing. I stopped forcing closure on emotions that needed time. I stopped pushing myself to be okay quickly. And something surprising happened. Feelings resolved themselves, not because I fixed them, but because I stayed present long enough. There is a patience that comes from depth. A patience with yourself, with others, with life. You stop needing immediate answers. You accept that some things unfold slowly, and this patience changes your relationship with uncertainty. You don't panic as easily. You don't fill silence with noise. You allow ambiguity without losing ground. This is not passivity, it is groundedness. In conversations, you speak less, but with more clarity. You don't argue to win. You speak to align. You don't react to provocation. You respond to meaning. And when you decide not to engage, you don't feel guilty. You trust your discernment. Quiet power teaches you that not every battle is yours. Not every emotion needs expression. Not every thought needs airtime. Some things are better kept inside until they mature. This doesn't make you distant. It makes you intentional. Over time, people notice this about you. They may not name it, but they feel it. They feel safe around you because you don't escalate, you don't overwhelm, you don't dominate. Your presence is steady, and steadiness is rare. In a world that reacts instantly, someone who can pause becomes an anchor. This doesn't mean you will always be understood. Quiet depth is still misunderstood. Some will think you are cold, uninterested, detached. Let them. Understanding everyone is not your responsibility. Staying true to your nervous system is. There was a time when I tried to correct every misunderstanding, to explain myself fully, to make sure no one misread me. That was exhausting. Now, I let actions speak. Consistency speaks. Presence speaks. Boundaries speak. And those who are attuned will hear them. Those who aren't were never listening anyway. Quiet power is not about being liked, it's about being aligned. Aligned with your pace, your depth, your inner truth. When you are aligned, you don't need approval to feel real. You don't need noise to feel alive. You don't need performance to feel valuable. You simply are. And that simplicity is powerful. If you've stayed with this story until now, you may feel a familiar calm, a sense of recognition, like something unspoken has been named. If you are someone who doesn't talk much, who feels everything deeply, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to harden. You don't need to speed up. You don't need to explain yourself into exhaustion. Your quiet nature is not a limitation. It is a different operating system, one that prioritizes depth over speed, meaning over volume, presence over performance. When you stop fighting it, it stops draining you. It starts supporting you. And from that place, you move through the world with a calm confidence. Not loud, not flashy, but grounded. If this quiet space has helped you feel understood or simply allowed you to breathe a little deeper, you can gently support this channel by liking the video and subscribing. It helps this kind of slow, thoughtful English reach people who need it too. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment. And as you return to your day or night, carry your silence not as something to hide, but as something to stand within. Because your quiet is not empty, it is full of power.